welcome to this important conversation about creating accessible futures. I'm going to run through our slides real quickly. If we can move to the first one. You may not all know quite as much about Lyme Connect, so I'll share a little bit more. We are focused on rebranding disability through achievement. We will be 20 years old next year, which is hard to believe, but we are focused on attracting high potential university students and professionals both, including veterans who have all types of disabilities into our network. That Lyme network is currently 35,000 members strong, and we know there are a lot more people we can support, so we're looking to grow it. We prepare our network members with essential tools and confidence that helps them to achieve their goals. And we also connect our network members for scholarships, leadership programs, internships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations who are our partners. And we also support our corporate partners on the other side, not only through recruiting, but also by onboarding, helping them to onboard, develop, promote, and retain all of their employees who have disabilities, which today, white collar employees, it's about 30% of overall employees, which is a lot. Together, we celebrate the strengths and talents of people with disabilities. So I would like to now introduce Tom Wilson. Tom, thank you for joining us. Tom is our Global Board Chair Emeritus, and I always say the reason we exist is because of Tom. He was our first believer and advocate when he was an HR talent exec at Merrill Lynch, and he has been involved with us for a number of years. We named this leadership award after him because of his contributions. And Tom is still, he's retired, semi-retired, but he continues to serve in his HR and talent acquisition fields because he has such a passion for growing people and supporting people throughout their careers and their lives. So without too much further ado, Tom, thank you.
Susan, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. I couldn't think of a better way for me to celebrate this date and to be with three of our fellow leaders today. Again, I'm Tom Wilson, and I am a white male with glasses. And I used to say I had salt and pepper hair. It's now more salt than pepper. And I'm wearing a kind of coral or pinkish shirt today. And just thrilled to be with you, and thrilled to lead this conversation with three of our Leadership Award winners. And I'm going to transition now to ask them to introduce themselves, and they're going to share a little bit about themselves and what they are, what they're doing, but also I'm going to ask them specifically to speak to how their experiences have shaped their understanding of disability inclusion and social progress. So let's see. With that, I will start with Emma and ask you to each of you to introduce yourself. First, Emma.
Sounds great. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Shear. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining today from Denver, Colorado, here in the United States. To provide a quick visual description, I'm a white woman with brown hair and clear glasses, and I'm currently wearing a striped shirt and a navy blazer. I work at ThoughtWorks as a principal data scientist, but what that actually means is that I help run our data, AI, and analytics practice. My path to get here was a little bit unconventional because I spent about a decade before pivoting into data as a professional chef. But I didn't leave the kitchen because I stopped loving it all of a sudden. I left because my body couldn't sustain it anymore. See, I live with a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or EDS. So while I look able-bodied on the outside, I deal with joint dislocations that cause chronic pain, fainting episodes from low blood pressure, and severe allergies. So when I looked at this year's theme about amplifying leadership and social progress, my focus actually went back to Lyme Connect's stated mission about the need for rebranding disability, especially in the workplace. We often talk about disability as a challenge to overcome, but in reality, living with a disability, in my opinion, can be a great training ground for developing actually high performance leadership. In the business world, we often pay thousands of dollars to take courses on how to manage ambiguity and pivot under pressure, but disabled people often have to use these skills every day just to navigate an inaccessible world. So, my experience has taught me that true social progress happens when we as a society stop viewing inclusion as making room out of charity and start recognizing that unique experiences and abilities have value. So, I'm very excited to join today, and I'll pass back to Tom.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. And then Maria.
Oh, hi everyone. My name's Maria Finelli. I work at MITRE as a cloud engineer, so I work on different government agencies come to MITRE to solve problems, and I consult on their infrastructure issues and try to help them reach a solution. I'm also a PhD student at Tufts University. I study privacy preserving databases and recovery. I'm located out of Boston right now. The disability I personally live with is autism, which kind of affects my entire life because I can't read social cues as well. It's sort of something I have to manually train and hone. Like I don't understand certain what a certain eye movement would mean or uh, gestures would mean, and I need to figure out how to communicate with other people. And I also have like chronic migraines and neurological issues that people don't see, and I could go nonverbal, and I have to try to accommodate neurotypicals when they're very confused. And I'm trying to figure out the best ways to introduce that these things occur and how to include people in the workplace. Because when I was starting out, I had a lot of difficulty interviewing for an entry-level job. I kept getting rejected mostly because I was misinterpreting the questions and the social cues. And there's ways to bring people in that would not evaluate them just based on the social cues, but on their skills and what they can bring to a company. And I was hoping to work with Lime Connect to help amplify how these people contribute to an organization and what autistic leadership would look like.
Thank you, Maria. Varun.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. This is Varun. It's great to be here. I am a South Asian male wearing a very cozy looking white sweater and blue glasses. I am the founder and executive director of Access to Success, which is a Toronto-based nonprofit on a mission to enable everyone. Um, I didn't expect to be doing what I do. I'm a bit of an outlier here in that I created my own job, but in a past life, I used to be a finance professional. I started my career, I'm trained as a chartered accountant. I started my career in private equity, worked in large cap equity research. I did my MBA at the University of Toronto, which is where I started Access to Success. I worked for a while in financial services here in Toronto as well, and now I run this organization full time, which is essentially um, helping startups building life-changing innovations for people with disabilities scale their work so that they can benefit people worldwide. I do this because I have a couple of disabilities myself. I'm hard of hearing and I use hearing aids in both my ears. I'm relying on live captions right now, and I have what's called Erb's palsy, which is a form of partial paralysis in my left arm. So a lot of the work that I do today stems from my own experiences with disability as well. More specifically, in particular, for instance, I've always dreamt of a future where I would have smart contact lenses that would use AI to give me live captions. Now, obviously, that doesn't exist, so I'm going to have to wait for that. But in the meantime, my team and I are helping dozens and dozens of other entrepreneurs working on the dreams of other people with disabilities and helping them make those dreams come true.
Varun, thank you. I'm so thrilled to be holding this conversation with the three of you today. And I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting discussion for our audience. And just to begin our conversation, I want to ask uh, our panel, what does an accessible environment look like for you? And in your experience, is there a commonly overlooked barrier that has had an impact on inclusion? And I'll start by directing that question to Emma and then ask Maria as well.
Certainly. So often we equate accessibility with physical compliance. Both of those two words are big. The physical side, so focusing on physical accessibility, compliance, so focusing on what we have to do as organizations or legally. But frequently we overlook what Maria was referencing around those unwritten rules of how business actually gets done. These are the social expectations that actually create the biggest barriers in my experience. So, for example, if you take a typical client dinner, this is a good example I typically go back to. It sounds really simple, especially as a foodie. Like, I love food, I love going out to eat, but it's not that simple. It's typically a combination of the venue having backless bar stools, which are super uncomfortable, a family style meal where I can't verify the ingredients, and then a limited or even preset menu where I'm usually allergic to most of it. So I'm stuck between trying to woo a client while simultaneously having this awkward 20 question moment with the waiter to try and make sure that I don't have a reaction, which is very awkward in work settings and also not safe. So, see, this is avoidable by simply letting people know ahead of time where we would be eating. So, with all of these unwritten rules and expectations, the biggest barrier for a lot of us is all of the wasted energy that comes with that inaccessibility or lack of inclusion. Because, see, if I have to spend 40% of my daily energy masking and pretending that I'm not in pain or dealing with navigating these environments, which are often not set up for me or set up for anyone that doesn't fit the typical cookie cutter mold, you're only getting 60% of my potential. So for me, an accessible environment is simply one that protects my capacity and comfort so I can spend it on delivering even more business value and impact rather than focusing more on surviving.
Mm. Emma, that is such an insightful answer. Thank you. Maria, your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I second everything she just said because predictability is a huge factor. Like I need to know what I'm working on, what does success look like, and not in like those fancy business terms. I need like concrete, like deliver this by this date, and I need it to work at X speed or um, benefit this client in a specific manner. But also, I need, for me personally, like a quiet environment. Like if I have a lot of light going on, it can set off a migraine. I need sometimes I put in earplugs. I have special ones I put in so I can hear when other people are talking to me. But it they're not automatically in accommodation with the job. Typically, when people see autistic people, they're like, "Oh yeah, you have those completely block sound or the headphones that block out sound completely." And that's typically what a job hands you. So something where I can somewhat interact with my environment and still be a part of the team. And I also have problems with auditory processing sometimes. Like someone will tell me something and then I won't remember it. I need like a notepad next to me or I write it down on my laptop. And then they'll get upset with me because I forgot it and I can't remember the exact details. Uh, and it, I need some leniency there and from my management. And it's like, okay, she's gonna get the work done. Just make sure she has a notepad and she's ready to go.
Thank you. Uh, just great examples of how specific tools and protocols can really make a difference for people's experience. To expand that question, I'd like to ask what kinds of resources and tools you're now most excited about that help advance accessibility in the workplace. And let me start with Varun first on that question.
Thanks, Tom. Well, the obvious one is AI. I mean, I would be remiss to not mention it at this point. Artificial intelligence is changing the entire spectrum of what accessibility tech means and looks like. What that means is when people think AI right now, a lot of people equate AI with something like ChatGPT. Now, naturally, ChatGPT and similar large language models are very, very important. They are the world's knowledge in one place, but also customized to you and your needs. People are using ChatGPT in some really, really interesting ways in terms of, for instance, building on what Maria talked about earlier, asking questions in a comfortable setting about social cues, for instance, questions that they wouldn't be comfortable necessarily asking another person. They're using ChatGPT for summarizing, for rephrasing, for tone, for language, for clarity, for grammar, just all sorts of absolutely amazing use cases that's saving time, helping build knowledge, and just increasing productivity overall. But the reality now is that artificial intelligence is so much more than large language models right now. This is the part that a lot of people maybe don't realize. AI is radically improving the availability and affordability of all types of assistive technology. For me, for instance, live captions, changed the course of my life. Now, that's natural language processing. I'm going to come back to that. Similarly, on vision recognition side, there are some absolutely astounding tools that are coming out that use vision recognition technology that's helping people with vision loss. Similarly, people are there using AI for controlling smart wheelchairs. People are using AI for autonomous navigation, for last mile navigation, just for smarter assistive tech, including even prosthetics overall. So what's happening is you've got a lot of tools that are coming out faster and are becoming more and more affordable because AI is reducing the cost of developing these new innovations. For me, I did mention I'll go back quickly to the live captions piece, just to give you a real life example of how it's changing the life for somebody like me. I had my first phone call at the age of 30. I'm old, in 2021. That's because since I lip read, I've never really been able to speak on the phone comfortably with anyone. It was
Mm.
only in 2021 that Google released live captions for phone calls on the Google Pixel line, which is what I happen to have. And the way I realized that is my then girlfriend, she was running some errand, and just called me from the car as it happens. And we ended up in just a random conversation for 15 minutes. And at the end of that conversation, she goes, Varun, do you realize this is the first time we've had a conversation that lasted longer than a few minutes? And I go, this is the first time I've had a conversation on the phone that lasted longer than a few minutes ever. I married that girl. It literally changed the direction of my life. Now, I had the luxury of having captions during COVID as well. Now, again, because I lip read in a world of masks, I don't know what I would have done. It would have been a very, very different situation. I will add that tools and resources doesn't just equate to technology. I do want to shout out resources like Lime Connect, which are very much rebranding disability through achievement. We do need these resources just like Lime Connect, other organizations that are doing absolutely amazing work because innovation as it relates to the world of disability doesn't just mean technology.
I love that point. Emma, what excites you in the space of accessibility today?
I'm personally very excited about this question. For those of you who don't know me, AI and accessibility are the two topics that I absolutely love to nerd out about more than anything in the world. And I also want to recognize that at this moment in time, a lot, if not most people, feel very skeptical, if not very fearful about what AI actually means. In a time where it's already extremely challenging to find roles, there's this fear of replacement, fear of not keeping up. Um, as someone who works deep in this code every day, trying to figure out how do we solve really specific problems using I want to take a slightly different view of it, slash the way I view it is a little bit different. Where I see AI in terms of potential right now is as an equity engine. I think that there's these really big
Mhm.
systemic blockers. Varun mentioned a few of them that, when tackled, are going to fundamentally change how everyone can interact with the world. And I think the part that makes me most excited, and it doesn't have to be AI, it can be partially AI, it can be really just in common conversations, is the fact that we're actually breaking out the difference between standard and reality. So when you think about a standard process of how you accomplish any kind of task, there is an assumed way of how you'll do it, whether it be a conversation, a technical task, how you show up to work or get dressed, right? There's this assumption and there's this cookie cutter that has historically been the way of working. I think what I'm excited about when I'm seeing new tools and resources and products, whatever it might be, come to the market right now is the fact that it's specifically allowing for us to look at people in terms of their experience and their needs and say, what's different? Not how can we stick them into a box and make one thing that works for everybody. So I want to give a couple of examples of what this has actually meant for me, because I think there's the conceptual what these tools could mean in practice versus the actual everyday. And I'm excited about like the 10-minute things we can build that like drastically change things. So I know we talked about before, like going out to dinner or work dinners can be a nightmare for me. I spent about 10 minutes and developed a very, very quick agent that will allow me to either take a picture of a menu or send a link, and it will tell me here are the foods that you're most likely to have actually be safe and what you should probably ask the waiter. Yes, there's the tech side of it. Honestly, from my perspective, I don't care. What I care about is the fact that I can be present during that dinner and instead ask maybe two questions and just confirm. I'm not doing all of that extra effort and work simply because of this tool. Maria was mentioning kind of the social navigation components. That's huge for me. It might be a challenging conversation. It might be giving feedback to my team. It might be figuring out how to even structure a dinner that typically you go in and just wing it. It's allowing to create, I know people were mentioning in the chat, these explicit expectations and written expectations. At least for me, it's helped with navigating how do you make some of these implicit things that no one teaches you and no one talks about into something tangible that's very easy to follow. And the third, which I think is funny, is when it comes to recruiting, actually. And I was talking briefly with Tom about this. Right now, it's all about how do you fit yourself into this cookie cutter that we assume AI is looking for a role, which I think is
Mm.
kind of absurd, but I understand it. We're so close to the point of being able to say, I have unique skills and experience. What would I be great at? It might be completely different. I mean, I went from chef to data scientist. Like, you cannot have more different jobs. And from my perspective, there's a lot of parallels. Similarly, I think that things that have historically been viewed as irrelevant, different, or even disadvantages in the workplace, quickly we can start realizing are actually these tangible advantages that make us perfect fits for jobs that we may have never even considered. So I think for me, I'm excited that tools are now becoming not one size fits all, but instead these tools and resources are really meeting people where they are to allow them to get to where they want to go instead.
Thank you. And I just love the power of that, the idea of equity engines, and it seems uh, the diversity of resources that can potentially become those equity engines is only growing. And as you've said, it's beyond technology. Um, Yet historically, I think one of the things we've faced is that society has had a kind of a compliance mindset toward the issue of accessibility. And so I want to ask the panel, how can we see that mindset shift from a simple compliance thought process to uh, accessibility becoming a real driver of technological, of commercial, and indeed of social progress? Maria, let me ask you that question first.
For me, I wish it was like less dependent on the medical model because for me, it took
Mm,
me years to get a doctor to even recognize what was going wrong with me. And you need that to get legal compliance. And this should be like a conversation that you have with your coworkers, your management. Like, here's who I am and here's how I worked best. Most of my accommodations don't even cost a company money. It's just asking, like, can I step aside and clarify terms with you? I don't understand what this meant. Like, I'm going into my calls on Friday. I'm doing a very deliberate practice to define terms so I'm not talking over somebody. Um, that's helpful for me to do with like a manager. Uh, it's I'm not looking to sue anybody. That's what compliance is primarily looking at. And uh, that's for worst case scenario. I understand why the regulations were put in place, but disability is about a person and how that person fits into that environment. And it's not that the person's incompetent. There's special talents that you need to pull out of that person. Uh, and that's where I see that going.
thank you. Varun, what are your thoughts?
Well, Maria took the words right out of my mouth. The social model of disability is what people really need to understand about the experience of people with disabilities. There's this definition which says disability, but I prefer to say inaccessibility is a mismatch between a person and their environment. So when people start to
Mm,
realize that disability or accessibility is not a disability problem, accessibility is an everybody problem, That's when the change starts to happen a little bit. The way we like to do that at my organization is by sharing lots and lots of real life examples. So many of the people listening right now may already know this, but for example, emails, Velcro straps, electric toothbrushes, these were all accessibility products. Emails were invented by Vint Cerf because he's hard of hearing and he couldn't talk to his wife on the phone. And of course, Vint Cerf is one of the big supporters of Lime Connect. And so he invented the technology that underlies emails so that he could communicate with his wife. Velcro straps, I think everyone's familiar with that story about how, for somebody like me, for instance, it's a little bit hard to use traditional shoelaces. And so Velcro straps were invented for those use cases. Similarly, for toothbrushes, again, manual toothbrush would be very hard for me to use with my left hand, where I'm left-handed. And so electric toothbrushes were invented so that people who don't have that upper limb mobility,
Mm.
for whom that upper limb mobility is limited, they can use electric toothbrushes, which don't require that fine motor movement. And when you start taking those examples and expanding that, even in the business world, I hate going into the business case, but even if you do go into that business case, you can tell people, imagine if you could copyright or if you could IP protect Velcro straps today. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity in the world of disability. You could try to convince people by telling them it's the right thing to do. You could make the social case, you could make the equity case. In my experience, what I find is when a lot of people don't listen to those cases or when they don't care about those cases, it's because for them it goes back to what's in it for me. And that's just human nature. So, what's in it for me is when you design for disability, you simply create better experiences for everyone. That's why Access to Success, what we do is we are on a mission to enable everyone, not just people with disabilities. Disability and accessibility is just better experiences, period.
Thank you, Maria and Varun. I love those perspectives, and I love the idea that accessibility is an everybody problem, which indeed it is. And and you mentioned Vint Cerf, who loves to point out that accessibility is part of Google's mission statement. It is indeed an everybody problem, and beyond that, it's an everybody opportunity. Those are great examples how simple solutions that may have been initially conceived by a small part of the population change everybody's life for the better. Thank you for those wonderful thoughts. Let's shift our perspective a little bit here now to the leaders of the organizations that surround us, whether they're business or otherwise. I'd like to ask our panel what advice you might have for leaders who want to advance disability inclusion but don't know where to start. Emma, let me start with you.
Sure. Before I dive into advice, I think one thing that I want to acknowledge is that there's a very big gap in professional development today. It can feel
Hmm.
really overwhelming when you don't have the answers of how do I create an inclusive environment? I want to, but I don't know how to. I start with the legal pieces. I'm hearing I need to look past the legal pieces. It can be a little bit overwhelming. So I want to normalize the fact that nobody teaches any of us how to create this kind of inclusive environment, how to be a supportive manager to really awesome disabled employees. Also, no one teaches disabled people how to do any of this. This is something that everyone is figuring out for the first time as we go. And I think these kinds of conversations normalize that. So, my advice is to stop waiting for all of the answers and the perfect HR policy to start making changes. In
Hmm.
my opinion, real inclusion happens in daily interactions, not necessarily the employee handbook. You request accommodations, they're accepted, HR and legal do their thing, and then it never really comes up again. Except we work every day with people that are impacting and making our environment more or less inclusive. And I think it was Varun saying there's a lot of power in that. That means we all have a lot of autonomy to create that kind of environment to an extent in the ways that we can. So I think it starts by having conversations that we often avoid, just like this one, about what are the challenges and how do we start overcoming them instead of avoiding them. You can tangibly do this by starting to ask your team, your coworkers, your peers, what makes doing your job hard right now? Or how can I best support you? I recognize that neither of these questions have anything to do with disability. And that's because a lot of the time, what people need in order to feel included, like Maria said, is not about the medical components. I don't need you to be an EpiPen expert or know how to relocate a joint. But viewing me as a human, showing me respect, just starts by not assuming what you don't know and instead asking. That's kind of the approach that I've taken when I was back at my prior firm, ZS. I didn't really wait for a mandate. I just started having these conversations with people because I thought it was important. And we turned that into a networking group, which quickly became 450 people.
Mm.
We thought there was no demand for it. We thought that no one wanted to have this conversation until there was a space to have the conversation and people started to feel safe. So I think it doesn't start with some massive corporate strategy. I think it's incredible when it starts from the top. Like you said, Google has it in their mission statement. It starts from the core, but I don't think it has to. I think it starts by just talking to each other. So even though no one has taught us or is likely going to teach us how to do this, I think we can continue to learn and teach each
Mm.
other how to continue to show up and see each other as the capable professionals that we are and meet people's individual needs because the reality is that we all have individual needs. It's just a matter of that if you're disabled, it might be relevant for that. So I think that that's kind of how you start creating an accessible or inclusive environment because it's something that everyone can do in their day-to-day life.
I love that idea. Like accessibility, inclusion benefits everybody, and it starts with good leadership, with respect, with asking the right questions, with empathy. Um, all of those things make perfect sense. Maria, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I found that the best way to do that is to be patient and listen. In my first corporate job, I was basically performance managed, and I was trying to introduce, like, hey, when I'm in an open office space, I hear 10,000 voices and we're in a giant meeting. Like, is there some way I can participate in this meeting without having all this background noise or something like that? And my management did not take that very well. They just they're like started documenting like she's not performing well and not even thinking of how to accommodate me because they don't know how to accommodate autism, which it'd be fine to take a Teams call from a more quiet area and then turn on your captions. And you can think of ways to participate in the meeting from a distance. It's not like they're not getting input from you, but that would have been a completely free accommodation that someone could have done for me. So assuming like the person that's asking for the accommodation means the best and wants to contribute to your business, is where to start at. It, it's emotionally difficult for an employee to reach out even in the first place, so they're kind of struggling to tell you what's happening.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, I think we're all aware that in various ways in our society, inclusion is not fully being supported in every domain, and yet it is good leadership, and it benefits all employees. And so, I'd like to ask Varun, how can allies and organizations partner more effectively with disabled leaders and communities?
Well, there's three things I would like to mention there. The first one being education. Um, like Emma and Maria said so amazingly well, um, there's just so much that leaders and organizations very often don't understand. I've myself gone through plenty of stories in a past life where I requested an accommodation for an interview, got ghosted, never heard back again. Requested an accommodation at job, which was basically live captioning for Teams calls, and it took them a year and a half to do nothing. All they needed to do was just toggle that option on for employees, but they couldn't do that for, you know, reasons. Um, so the first one is just education. Now, if somebody's here watching this, or if you're watching this recording afterwards, I imagine you're interested in the space and you're already addressing that education piece. So the next piece after education becomes co-design. It ties back to your previous question as well in terms of where do we begin? You begin by listening to the people you're trying to solve for. What do your employees need? What do your management need? What do your customers need? What are they telling you about where are the gaps in their experiences? Where are the mismatches in their experiences? And based on what they tell you, you prioritize. Whether that's inclusive hiring
Mm.
practices, inclusive employment practices, whether that's um, employee resource groups, whether that's career progression resources, mentorship, whatever it might look like, needs to be informed by the community you're trying to solve with, not for. As they say, nothing about us without us. That co-design piece is the bedrock of any steps that a company or a leader might want to make in their journey towards disability inclusion. But I did say that I have three things I want to mention. And the third thing is because if there are leaders and management of companies here in a Lime Connect webinar, I am preaching to the choir. I don't need to convince you anymore. What I will say is for everybody else who's here, who's perhaps early on in their journeys, and they have that opportunity to perhaps do something about it. You don't have to, but maybe you kind of are curious about doing something about helping other companies and organizations get started, like Emma did, like Maria did. What do you do then? So, for my perspective, like I said, I am a very much an accidental disability advocate. I had no intention, I had no dreams of doing what I do today, and now I know what I do is going to be my life's work. And it all started because I realized that a lot of the efforts that are taking place elsewhere is about the stick approach. A carrot versus a stick. It's more of a stick approach. It's compliance. It's you need to do this versus, like I said, here's what's in it for you. So how do you make disability inclusion cool? If you can answer that question around you for the people around you, that's what's going to get them excited. In my situation, the technology piece is really what got people, a lot of people, very excited. We realized that there's a huge gap in the market and we ended up going down that path. But it doesn't have to be that. For your community, for the people around you, if you can answer the question, what makes disability cool for them, that's your catalyst for getting people excited to actually take actionable steps and not just sort of nod politely.
Mm. Varun, thank you. Um, this has been a fantastic discussion. And as we start to wrap up this section and prepare to open up for questions, the last question I'd like to ask of each of you, and I'll start with you, Maria, is what gives you hope about the future of disability inclusion?
Oh, I feel like there's a lot of culture shifts that we can actually start openly talking about this. Like 20 years ago, if you had this discussion in the workforce, it would be like, hush, hush, you're gonna get fired, please be quiet. And now we're finally talking about tools and processes, and you, there, it's safer to go up to your colleagues and be like, hey, uh, could you, could you make this accommodation for me? It's less threatening. It's not that it isn't completely non-existent yet, but it's a more open culture, and I see it going more in that direction.
Is there anything specific that you think is driving that open culture?
I I wonder if it's social media, but I'm also thinking I'm a millennial, so when I was in college, we were pushing back on this stuff. Like if someone wasn't being included in a certain class, we were pretty pushy with the administration, being like, why isn't this accessible for other people? But I can't really talk outside that
Mm.
perspective. I'm pretty sure Gen Z would agree too.
Certainly, social media has the power to magnify those voices, and so that certainly sounds like that could be very much part of the of creating positive momentum. Emma, what gives you hope?
I think kind of building on what Maria shared, what's giving me hope is this shift from trying to make space and ask for permission to instead kind of demonstrating the value that's brought from it. I think for years, the advice that I was given and I even gave to other people is if there's a table where there's no chair for you, bring your own chair, right? And I stand by that in a lot of ways in terms of if you're not being included, it doesn't mean that you don't belong or that you're not meant to be there. But I think that what's giving me hope right now, and over the past year or two especially, is that we're starting to kind of rewrite the rules of how tables work overall
Hmm.
completely instead of saying, yes, let's help you bring your own chair. So what that means to me is that we're having some of these hard conversations to say, how do we systematically change how we're approaching inclusion fundamentally? And we're building the tools that are needed to remove these barriers that have historically been permanent and just assumed to be part of the workplace. In my own career, I've been told explicitly, we don't work from home, we don't work remote. That's just not what we do. Society has fundamentally shifted in a lot of different ways. And I
Mhm.
think that what's giving me hope is the fact that so many of these pieces can be used for good. So I think that my hope is that this next generation doesn't really have to fight for their seat at the table, and instead that they're invited, because people are starting to realize that this resilience and this perspective that
Mm.
they bring is actually valuable, not just something that you legally have to make space for or even should make space for, but the fact that it makes sense. I think we're moving towards a future and even just a general society where it's a lot more normalized to show up as your full, authentic self, whatever that looks like. And instead of it being an act of defiance of, oh, I didn't put makeup on today, or oh, I'm actually using my cane today, instead of pretending I don't need it, instead, it's just acting as a way that we can make it our standard for a modern adaptive leadership style and society where that is the expected, that is the norm, and we make space for everyone exactly how they are.
Thank you. And Varun, what gives you hope?
Oh, it's very hard to follow Emma and Maria. They speak
Mhm.
extraordinarily well. That was so well spoken. What gives me hope? Before I answer that, I do want to acknowledge that um, sometimes it does feel like bleak days, given where a lot of the conversation is at, given where a lot of the tricky environment we are in, given that there's been just such a pullback and so many resources and funding that used to be available and so many initiatives that used to exist. So it does sometimes feel like we are going through one of the troughs. Um, but the truth is that I'm very lucky that I get to work with a lot of change makers all over the world. And what we are seeing is um, a literally unparalleled increase in the amount of interest that's there in the world of accessibility and disability inclusion. Even among all of the conversations that are taking place around equity and justice, just to give you a real concrete example, we work with a whole lot of universities that do a lot of hackathons and pitch competitions and case studies on social justice issues. And increasingly, we're seeing a very noticeable uptake in the students taking up accessibility as their area of interest or disability inclusion as their area of interest. That's not an accident anymore. That's a very noticeable trend. Similarly, on the innovation side, we're seeing more and more funding opportunities come up for entrepreneurs building assistive tech. There are more and more investors who are standing up and saying, I have an interest specifically in supporting disability inclusion or accessibility innovation. That has not really happened before. This happened in 2025 of all years. This happened after the political world blew up. So there is still a lot of reason for hope. There's still a lot of things to look forward to. And for me, the biggest thing is the next generation of Emmas and Marias coming up.
Thank you. Thank you. Those answers all give me hope. Um, Thank you for just a great discussion here. We're going to turn to the our audience here and ask for any questions. The first response I see in the chat is not a question, but just a shout out of thanks to our interpreters today. So we thank both Avery and Livy for fantastic work that have really made this event just so much more accessible and enjoyable. Thank you. The first question for the panel, a very practical one. What suggestions do you have for someone who is currently looking for remote employment and is not very comfortable with networking? Anybody have some thoughts on that? And I would say, to state the obvious, if you haven't already, please do join the Lyme Connect network and avail yourself of our resources as a starting point. But perhaps our panelists have some practical solutions again for somebody who's looking for remote employment and not comfortable with networking. Any recommendations?
I have one. I think that it's interesting. Someone mentioned social media before in terms of the fact that it creates a good opportunity to highlight specific things. I think similarly, there's a lot more flavors of networking now than there ever have been. So like historically, networking meant like go to a happy hour and schmooze with 100 people in a dark room where it's awkward, right? As someone who doesn't drink and doesn't do well standing for long periods of time, it's not great. It's not great. I don't love it. That being said, will I do it? Sure. There's alternatives now. I think there's a lot of online networking opportunities, whether it be local meetup groups. I recently moved to Denver, Colorado. There are AI meetup groups. There are data meetup groups. I'm looking for a new job and want to connect with other people that are doing so. Outside of meeting in person, I think there's ways to also differentiate yourself online, whether that means posting thought leadership pieces about your perspective on something people aren't talking about, whether it is connecting online through LinkedIn with people and sending them a message instead of doing it in person. I think right now, not only are there more options for networking outside of the traditional view of it, but I also think that those are both more accessible and more accepted now and kind of expected. I was just talking to someone about the fact that I haven't had business cards in like 5 years because I never gave them to anyone in person. We exchanged LinkedIn's. And I think it's interesting because, again, as society shifts, in some ways it's harder because there's this reliance on the human-based connection, but there's also so many more ways to make that connection. So I would explore looking at alternatives outside of the traditional networking opportunities to find ones that feel either more comfortable or more accessible to you.
Terrific. Maria or Varun, do you have any thoughts to that?
Oh yeah, I would add that if you find someone on LinkedIn that you kind of want to model your career after feel free to send them a message. If they don't message you back, oh well, it's their loss. But you can always ask them questions. They'll be excited to talk about themselves. So it takes like the pressure off you, and you could possibly get a referral in the process. So don't be afraid.
Uh, that's great advice, and I'll just add that, like Emma said right in the beginning, in the world of AI, your specific expertise, that niche that you have, is what becomes really, really valuable. That can't really be replaced by AI. So feel free to use social media to talk about that niche that you have, that really small area that you can dive super deep into, that you can talk about days on end, and share that expertise with the world because it does get noticed.
Thank you. Uh, Another audience member asked if you could go back to the start of your career, what advice would you give to your younger self as they were deciding what path to take? Does anybody have some thoughts on that? I'm not sure I can remember the beginning of my career, so I'm going to leave it to our panelists.
I'm happy to kick it off with this one. I think the initial start of my career was interesting because not just the chef part, but the transition into data. I think for me, I repeatedly faced a very exaggerated version of you can't do this. This is not a space that's meant for you, and different versions of that. I think the advice that I would give myself at the time, or now I suppose, the advice I would give myself is that not sticking within the cookie cutter, within the expected mold, is not necessarily a problem. There's a lot of implied and even explicit, honestly, messages about how you should operate, about how you have to do a job. Even consulting, I never even pursued consulting during school because I assumed that I wasn't made for that. I've been in consulting for 5 years and thriving in it simply because of what I assumed I couldn't do. So I think the advice that I would give myself is one, doing things differently than other people is not necessarily bad. You're still doing it. And number two, that anything that's worth doing is worth doing partly. Or I've heard if it's worth doing it 100%, it's worth doing 90% of it, right? Um, I've heard a lot, and I felt myself a need to either try and make up for being disabled in the workplace by being the perfect employee in all ways outside of the ways our disabilities impact how we work. But I think in reality, when we're in this perfectionist mindset of making up for these things, as opposed to saying, oh, actually, these are kind of like value adds. And Maria said, once you level that playing field and you give people the access that they need, they're able to do the job just as well, if not even better. So I think the advice I'd give myself is to spend less time looking around at how other people are doing things or how people are expecting that they'll do it and not finding that average and fitting it. And instead saying, how can I tackle this and how can I do this even better, even if it means looking at it a little bit differently? I think there's a lot of power in that.
Emma, I love that perspective. And as somebody who's spent a lot of my career in the search and talent acquisition space, I can say that people tend to over-index on, what is broadly appealing to companies, when in fact, I love this idea of differentiation because you don't have to be relevant to every role that's out there. You just have to be right for that right role. And as marketers say, branding is differentiation. It's not being the same as, it is differentiating yourself. So I encourage you to take those steps. Uh, Anybody else have a thought on that question? What might you
Well,
advice would you give your younger self?
yeah, for autism related careers, you have to think of how to play to your strengths. Like for me, I thought of engineering because I could be evaluated for the things that I design and build. It's not necessarily social politicking, but there's some jobs where you absolutely need to politic. Like if you're getting the scope on a product, you need to know your client. And if you're autistic, that might be a bit difficult. So you might want to consider going more into the practical engineering aspects, but it really depends. A lot of autistic people aren't into engineering, so it's difficult in that regard. But think of your strengths and how it fits with your interests.
Um, I guess I'll just remind myself to not give up.
Mm,
It's hard. There's just no denying it. It gets hard, but don't give up. It took me 6 months to find my first job after I became a chartered accountant. I was literally weeks away from having to leave Canada because I was about to run out of money because I couldn't get my full-time job after I did my MBA. Just keep at it despite the hard days, despite the low days. And when you
mm,
do have the good days, make sure you celebrate them. It's really, really important to pause and celebrate your wins because that's what makes the hard days easier.
mm. I love that. Thank you so much. Uh, Emma, Maria, Varun, this has been a great conversation. Very encouraging to me. So many great insights. I'm sure, and I can speak for the audience in saying how much your insights and your leadership are appreciated. And I guess I would close with that. Our panelists here today, because they've been recognized as leaders in this space, and they have made a difference. And I would just encourage our audience too. You all are leaders and have tremendous potential to make an impact in your domains. So we really appreciate you being with us. We appreciate your partnership with Lime Connect. Again, to all of you, if you're not part of our network, please do join us. And we look forward to more of these panels again in the future. And again, I'll end with another thank you to our interpreters and to Susan and Renee and Lime Connect for putting this great session together today. Thank you so much. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and I'll thank you, Tom, as well for moderating a great session. We will send this recording out to all of you, and we do, as Tom said, encourage you to join our network in whatever way is appropriate for you. And certainly if you're a person with a disability, join as a network member. So again, thank you, Tom, Emma, Maria, Varun, and everyone enjoy the rest of your International Day of Persons with Disabilities.